So I had a moment to watch a film on Amazon Prime, and I picked this film out almost at random. It sounded kind of interesting. I had a couple of hours free, which is rare for me, and I thought, well, I'll watch a movie. It's called Mr. Jones. It's directed by a Polish lady named Agnieszka Holland. She's best known for a movie called Europa, Europa, which I saw in the 90s. I thought it was wonderful. A true story about a Jewish boy who survived the Holocaust by masquerading as a Hitler Youth. It's really good. It was written by another lady, Andrea Chalupa, whose parents were born in displaced persons camp after World War II, and she says they survived the horrors of both the Soviets and the Nazis. And this drove me insane. It drove me insane because we on the right are so bad about the culture. I know I've been complaining about this for 20, 25 years. This film, we should have picked this film up and banged the drum about it. We should have flocked to wherever it was playing to see it, and instead I didn't even know it existed. And I looked up the true story and researched it, and the story is movie-fied. It's a little bit, changed for the movies, but it's true to its source material. It's a very simple story. James Norton, very good British actor, plays a real-life journalist in the 1930s, a guy named Gareth Jones. And he's working for the former Prime Minister, Lloyd George, and his kind of think tank that he's got. And he has scored an interview with Hitler, and he comes back to try to warn Lloyd George's ministers about what is coming because of Hitler, and they laugh him off. And here's that scene.
War begins in the minds of men. Goebbels believes the Reich will be here for 1,000 years, which means they will most certainly expand to the east into Poland. The next great war, gentlemen, has already begun.
Herr Hitler will soon learn that there's a great deal of difference between holding a rally and running a country.
So they don't listen to him. He tells them the absolute truth. And he loses his job. And he has an idea, a very simple idea, that Stalin's Russia is making all these innovations and building up their economy and building up all these things, but the ruble is worth nothing. And so he says, well, if they're broke, where's the money coming from? So he travels to Moscow on the hopes of scoring an interview with Stalin. And there he meets the guy who is basically running the journalistic show in Washington. He was called our man in Moscow, Walter Duranty, who works for the New York Times and has a Pulitzer Prize. And he's played by Peter Sarsgaard, who's always good, but he's absolutely terrific in this. He's the best thing in the movie by far, but he's just absolutely sensational. And Duranty, which is absolutely true, is not only covering up for Stalin because he's a communist, he is also a sexually depraved horror show. He holds orgies where nude women shoot themselves up with heroin, and he walks around naked like the demonic goat who rules the mind of the woman on the court building in Manhattan. And interestingly enough, this meld of evil philosophies like communism and sexual depravity go together a lot. I mean, it's not just a coincidence. They go together a lot. In Davos, where they just met, here's a story from the Daily Mail, demand for sex work, I love that, skyrockets each year at the meeting of world leaders and business tycoons who jet in from all around the world to rub shoulders with each other. Escorts are booked into the same hotels as high-powered bosses and their employees. So the same people who want to dominate humanity and tell us that we have to eat insects while they fly around their private jets. We can't use any gasoline in our Volkswagens, but they get to fly around. Same people who are doing that are also paying $2,000 to $3,000 a night for orgies. And these are the guys who tell you sex work is work, just like the women's pimps. Sex work is slavery, by the way. I don't care how much you get paid for it. I know quite a lot about it from doing research for one of my novels, and it's basically slavery. All right. So Gareth Jones goes to Moscow and has to sneak out of Moscow to get to what is then called the Ukraine. And he discovers the Holodomor, which is a man-made famine created by Stalin by his collectivism. He said these farmers who own small farms are too rich and they're the bourgeoisie. We're going to destroy them. We're going to take their farms away. We're going to collectivize them. But not only did that kill the crops, but they stole the wheat to give to the elites in Moscow and took it away. And this resulted in the slaughter of no one knows how many millions of people by starvation. This was a Stalin-created starvation of between 5 and 10 million people. It's the city of New York wiped out, but not just wiped out by slow starvation. So children are eating, tree bark. They're eating people. It was just an absolute nightmare. There's a scene in it, basically, Gareth Jones finds a group of women and men trying to get their hands on something to eat. And he goes up to one of the women and he says, "How did this happen?" And she says, "How do you think it happened? Men came and tried to change the natural law. By changing the natural law, they destroyed the breadbasket and starved millions of people, a city's worth of people, just unimaginable horror. So at the end, as he is being thrown out of Russia, Gareth Jones confronts Walter Duranty, this sexually depraved liar for the New York Times, and he says, here's a piece of tree bark as a souvenir. Tell me why you lied.
What's keeping you here, lying for them?
You wouldn't know the first thing about how difficult it is to report from Moscow today, would you? Of course not. You're just a child. But it is not the job of a journalist to say, "How dare you, sir?" You actually thought you could interview Stalin and make some kind of difference, didn't you?
A souvenir from my trip. Tree bark. It's all the people have left to eat.
All right. Yes.
Руки! You keep it next to your place. Вперед! Пойдемте.
My dear Mr. Jones, there comes a time in every man's life when he must choose a cause greater than himself, than all his miserable little ambitions put together. Perhaps someday you will.
It's a wonderful scene, and Sarsgaard, as I say, is great, as Walter Duranty of the New York Times, Pulitzer Prize winner of the New York Times, who lied and covered up the Holodomor. And even when Gareth Jones went back and reported it at the cost of being canceled, having his career stripped away, and ultimately, after the movie is over, he was murdered for it, Walter Duranty goes in the New York Times and basically says, it's not true, it's not happening. He covers it up actively. The fact that the New York Times has never taken away, has never returned his Pulitzer Prize, which was given for other reporting from Moscow, tells you everything you need to know about the New York Times, because they too believe in something greater than themselves. That is themselves. They believe that they supersede the natural law, that they can change the natural law by lying it out of existence. That's why they have the 1619 Project that basically lies about the reasons for the founding of America, and they're continuing Duranty's dishonest work by spreading that through our school system. This is what's happening now, that men can't become women. Men can't become women. Women can't become men. It's just the way it is. That's the natural law. That people won't work without the chance to make a fortune. That tribalism can only be rejected. Racism can only be rejected. It can't be destroyed. The New York Times still thinks, like Walter Duranty thought, they can lie the natural law, the truth, out of existence. And the thing is, if you're a materialist, right, like Yuval Harari, who's supposed to be the great intellectual of Davos, when you think that there is nothing inside material, there's only material, then there is no natural law. This is what Yuval Harari says. They're just fictions that we make up.
You know, the whole idea that humans have, this, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will, that's over.
Matter, in fact, is just the language in which the spirit speaks. Matter tells us something about the truth. And to understand the spirit of man is to know that femininity is an embodied thing. It is an embodied thing. Women carry it within them. Each woman is, of course, an individual, but each woman carries femininity as each man carries some version of masculinity in himself, even though he's an individual. And it can't be changed by any surgery we know how to do. And power imbalances will always be there. They can't be destroyed. The power imbalances between men and women, the different kinds of power that men and women have, can only be transformed by love, but they can't be eliminated. There's a moral law. That is the natural law. There's a moral law. And when you try to rewrite it, what happens is the evil just goes someplace else. When you deny it, it just goes someplace else. Or when you deny the fact that men and women are different and they have different magisteriums, different areas of power, when you deny that, all you do is shift the evil around to someplace else. You just turn the evil on yourself. When you deny the fact that people are naturally tribalistic and racist, and you don't just simply say, we're not going to do the racism, we're going to not do it. If you let that racism out and think, well, I can change it it won't be racism against black people, because that's wrong, it'll be racism against white people. You simply continue the evil. The devil doesn't care who does the hating, as long as the hating gets done. What I'm telling you now, as I'm sure you recognize, is the gospel of Christ. This is the gospel of Christ, that the poor are always with you. Therefore, treat them with love. Women, submit to your husbands, but husbands, love your wives. Submit to the powers that be when they act as ministers of the loving God. Some people tell you that if you don't obey that law, you go to hell. And what I'm saying is, if you don't obey that law, you're in hell already. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.